If you've ever felt that pulse of anger when someone crossed a line you swore to protect, or found yourself standing between a bully and something irreplaceable, then you'll understand what happened next. This isn't just a story about rules and power. It's about what you do when someone threatens the last piece of your family, so stay with me. Because what happened under that old pecan tree changed everything, for us, and maybe for anyone who's ever been told to back down. She raised her arm, finger tightening on a black pistol, the barrel gleaming just inches from my son's head. Somewhere beyond the pounding in my chest, I heard the snap of dry leaves under her shoes and the shallow, anxious breaths that filled the space between us. My teenage boy stood frozen in the shadow of the treehouse, hands still dusted with sawdust from a day spent fixing the old railing. In that instant, everything I'd tried to protect felt one hair trigger from ending. Patricia Linwood was supposed to be here about property violations. That's what her email said, some nonsense about unauthorized construction and safety concerns. But now, under the battered branches of a pecan tree planted by my late wife's father, she looked more like a hunter than an HOA official. The neighborhood's rule enforcer had crossed an invisible line, and I knew it. The worst part? I recognized the look in her eyes. The gleam of someone who thought rules gave her the right to do anything. Even this. A small red dot suddenly danced across Patricia's forehead, blinking into existence from the tangled mesh of cameras and sensors I'd installed around the backyard. The moment the laser touched her, her body stiffened. She faltered, jaw trembling. She hadn't expected resistance, not from someone like me. For a second, the power in the yard shifted. She might have held the gun, but I held every angle she'd missed. Every blind spot was mine. Most people see a backyard. I see sightlines, sound traps, and digital threads, because I built them. Security isn't just a job for me, it's survival. When you've spent a lifetime learning to predict what desperate people might do, it becomes instinct. That's why I live here, because this was her home first. Because the hideaway behind Evan was the last thing my wife touched before she died. The last place she laughed with her son, her father, and me. That's why the HOA's crusade didn't end at code violations or warning letters. For us, this fight wasn't about siding or setbacks. It was about not letting anyone erase what she left behind. Maybe you know the feeling, the moment when something precious is threatened, and every cell in your body says, not this, not now, not ever. If you've ever found yourself staring down someone who thought they could break your family's spirit, this story is for you. If you've ever felt your heart race not out of fear, but because you refuse to step aside, lean in. What would you do to defend the last living memory of someone you loved? Some people inherit heirlooms or houses. We inherited a battle. Evan, my son, was barely 16, but he'd spent more time on that treehouse than most kids spend on their phones. Each plank held a story of rain-soaked afternoons, late-night repairs, and one stubborn promise that nobody would ever tear it down. Not while I was breathing. Patricia claimed it was about community safety. She waved violation slips and recited bylaws like gospel. But the truth was, she wanted control. She wanted us gone. Maybe she thought our grief made us weak. Maybe she thought the quiet ones never fight back. She'd watched us for months, every neighborly wave hiding a calculation, every meeting an excuse to probe for a fault line. But this was different. The gun was shaking in her grip, but it was real. Evan's back pressed against the wood his mother had sanded with her own hands, eyes locked on mine. I moved slow, careful, letting her see I wasn't afraid. But inside, my mind mapped every move, every tool, every backup system humming to life in the dark. Because if there's one thing the military teaches you, it's how to build a perimeter. How to make sure, even in the chaos, the right person always has the advantage. So, here's the question. How far would you go right now to defend what's yours? Where are you watching from? And who do you trust to stand by you when the line is drawn? The story didn't start with a gun, and it won't end here. But Patricia Linwood picked the wrong family, the wrong tree, the wrong memory to threaten. I promise you this. By the time the sun sets on this neighborhood, every secret she tried to bury will come crawling into the light. And for the first time, she's about to learn what it feels like to have the rules turn against her. The weight of Patricia's threat still lingered in the air as I guided him back inside, the sharp scent of leaves and dust trailing us through the kitchen. He tried to hide the tremor in his hands, brushing past me with a forced calm I recognized too well, the kind you learn when the world keeps pushing. I made a silent promise not to let him carry this alone. That night, sleep was a stranger. The wind outside teased the window panes, and every distant footstep on the sidewalk made me reach for the phone by instinct. I spent those hours piecing together every warning, citation, and veiled threat Patricia's HOA had thrown at us since we moved back to Willow Pines. The pattern was there, plain as day: petty fines for mailbox paint, safety notices for Evan's backyard practice sessions, and constant emails demanding proof of repairs. Nothing was ever enough for her. She wanted us gone. The next afternoon, the neighborhood was alive with the usual weekend gathering: a bake sale, kids riding bikes, laughter weaving between open garages. But beneath the sunshine, tension simmered. People kept their conversations polite but short. Some neighbors glanced over, offering tight-lipped smiles. Others looked away, pretending the day was just like any other. If you've ever wanted to stand up to unreasonable rules and see justice done, drop a like and subscribe to follow the rest of this story. Your support means more than you know. I took a slow walk along the winding path that split the green, our son trailing behind with his headphones on, the scars from last night written in the careful way he moved. There, on the community bulletin board, was another of Patricia's friendly reminders, this one warning against unsanctioned activities on private property, complete with a picture of our backyard, snapped from the alley. It was a message for us, but also for everyone watching. Break the rules, and you'll end up like the Anders. As I watched, a neighbor, Mrs. Connolly, who'd lived here longer than anyone, tugged my sleeve. She nodded at the board, her voice a low whisper. You know, this isn't the first time. Her gaze shifted to the group by the clubhouse, where Patricia stood in her crisp suit, laughing like nothing had happened. Last year, the Millers got 2 fines in a week. They moved by summer. The pattern was clearer now. Patricia and her board didn't just enforce rules, they weaponized them. Every so-called violation was a test, a way to see who would fight and who would fold. The neighborhood changed, one family at a time, until only those who bent the knee remained, and it wasn't just us. I spotted the Petersons, quiet but watchful, their own warning notice peeking from a manila folder under Mr. Peterson's arm. I scanned the area, picking up stray bits of conversation. People were talking, but not to us. They watched Patricia the way you watch a storm on the horizon, aware, bracing, but unwilling to draw attention. Evan lingered by the old swing set, earbuds in, but his eyes darted to the clubhouse, then back to me. I knew that look. He wanted to know if we'd be next. Dad, can we just leave it alone? He muttered when we crossed paths by the lemonade stand. I saw the conflict, hoped that things might go back to normal, a fear that standing up would only make it worse. It's not worth it if we have to move again. I knelt beside him, letting the breeze carry our words away. This isn't just about us, Ev. They're counting on everyone being afraid. If we let them, they'll do this to the next family too. As the sun dipped behind the clubhouse, Patricia took the microphone, her smile wide, voice echoing over the speakers. Let's remember, community means responsibility. We all have a duty to keep Willow Pines safe and welcoming. The crowd clapped, but the applause felt brittle. I saw more than a few people glancing at their phones, stealing looks at the bulletin board, or simply gathering their things to go. The message was sinking in, whether Patricia realized it or not. Fear had become a fixture here, just as real as the lawns and the painted fences. That night, back at home, I reviewed the footage from my cameras. Not just ours, half the block had new surveillance signs, more out of anxiety than confidence. My system flagged unusual movement. Someone had walked the alley behind our fence again, stopping just under the broken floodlight. The same route Patricia had taken the night before. The data didn't lie. She wasn't just enforcing rules. She was watching, probing, looking for any opening. If she wanted a test, she'd get one. Because when fear becomes the rule of law, it's only a matter of time before someone pushes back. This fight wasn't just for Evan or the hideaway, or even for our own peace. It was for everyone who'd ever felt powerless in the place they called home. Tonight, I started planning, because what Patricia never understood, what bullies never see coming, is that some of us were built to fight from the shadows. And now, the whole neighborhood was watching. Len Brooks sat alone at his desk, the soft blue light of his computer monitor flickering over a row of dusty HOA binders. His fingers hovered above the keyboard, unmoving, as if the next email might tip some hidden balance. Outside, the dusk was folding in around Willow Pines, painting the street with the gold of porch lights and the hush of families settling into their evening routines. But inside Len's study, the air was heavy, a silence made thicker by all the words he hadn't spoken. The HOA minutes were open in front of him, each line a record of small decisions, some harmless, others with consequences that weighed on his conscience. Patricia's voice echoed in his head, brisk and assured, dismissing the Anders' appeals, pushing for order. The gavel she used in meetings seemed to echo here too, an accusation that never quite faded. Len reached for his mug, hands trembling slightly as he sipped lukewarm coffee. Through the window, he saw movement. Michael and Evan, returning from the community gathering, their shapes small and solitary beneath the pecan tree. Len's gaze dropped, shame coloring his face. He'd watched this pattern play out before, families pushed to the edge, neighbors too scared to help, and the board, led by Patricia, always finding ways to justify it. The rules made it easy, but that didn't mean it was right. His wife, Marlene, peeked in, her eyes searching his face. "Are you coming to bed?" she asked quietly, glancing at the screen. "Or is it another long night with Patricia's emails?" Len forced a thin smile. "Just wrapping up." But as she left, he let out a long breath, rubbing his eyes with the heel of his hand. How many nights had he sat here, telling himself he was powerless? How many times had he signed off on fines and letters, convincing himself it was just the rules, not people's lives? He scrolled through the latest board, group chat, Patricia's messages flooding in. The Anders situation requires decisive action. They're setting a precedent. We can't afford weakness. A knot tightened in his chest. He remembered our son as a little kid, wobbling down the block on a bike with a helmet too big for his head. Now, the boy looked older than his years, a shadow where laughter used to be. And Michael, he wasn't just another troublemaker. Len knew the pain that loss left behind. He'd seen Michael at the cemetery last winter, kneeling at his wife's grave in the first snow, hands shaking, but not from cold. That kind of grief wasn't something a fine could fix. He looked at the stack of violation slips, Patricia's handwriting scrawled across the top. How many more would she send? How many more families would be encouraged to move along? Len's hand hovered over his phone, the urge to call Michael pressing in. But fear kept him still. Fear of Patricia's retaliation, of losing his place on the board, of the silent judgment from neighbors who pretended not to see. A notification chimed. A new email from Patricia. Emergency board meeting tomorrow. We can't let this slide. Prepare your notes. And remember, discretion. Len stared at the screen, his jaw tightening. Discretion meant silence. It meant looking away when lines were crossed, telling himself the ends justified the means. He glanced around his office, eyes landing on a faded photograph of his daughter at her high school graduation, cap tilted, smile wide. She'd moved out years ago, searching for a place where the rules weren't so suffocating. Len wondered if he'd learned anything from her absence, or if he'd just grown more comfortable with complicity. Down the block, porch lights flickered on one by one, the illusion of peace settling over Willow Pines. But inside, Len's heart hammered against his ribs. He wanted to do the right thing, needed to, but each step felt like moving through mud, every choice a trap. Was he just another bystander, or could he finally tip the scales? A sharp rap at the front door broke his reverie. He startled, coffee sloshing over the rim. It was Michael, standing under the porch light, worry etched into every line of his face. For a moment, Len hesitated, hands pressed to the edge of his desk. Did he answer as a neighbor, or as the man who'd looked away for too long? He stood, pushing back the chair, forcing himself to move. This time, when he opened the door, he didn't offer a practiced smile or a careful excuse. Instead, he let the concern show, body rigid, shoulders tense, voice low. "Evening, Michael." "Everything all right?" Michael's eyes searched his, quiet but piercing. "Can we talk?" Len swallowed, nodding. In that moment, the mask cracked. He wasn't just the HOA treasurer. He was a man wrestling with the line between duty and decency, between silence and the courage it takes to finally speak. The next. Morning, the air felt heavy as storm clouds gathered above Willow Pines. My phone vibrated before sunrise, an email from Patricia titled, "Urgent Emergency Board Session." The text was clipped and cold. All parties must attend. Non-compliance will be recorded. No greeting, no explanation, just authority flexed in bold font. That was Patricia's way. I glanced at our son across the breakfast table, his eyes ringed with fatigue. "I saw the email," he muttered, barely touching his cereal. "You're going, right?" His voice cracked, halfway between hope and dread. "Wouldn't miss it," I said, forcing confidence I didn't feel. I ruffled his hair, a move that made him roll his eyes, but for a moment, he almost smiled. Later, as I walked to the clubhouse, I counted the details. Neighbors' curtains twitching, Mrs. Peterson's dog barking at every footstep, the odd hush that fell whenever I passed. The clubhouse stood at the heart of Willow Pines, banners advertising the upcoming spring festival flapping in the breeze. Inside, the walls echoed with nervous energy. A table of board members sat at the front, laptops open, faces set like granite. Patricia occupied the center, her posture flawless, her expression unreadable. Around the lobby, a handful of residents clustered in uneasy knots, parents with coffee cups, retirees whispering behind pamphlets. The tension was palpable, like the hush before a courtroom verdict. Even the walls felt complicit, lined with photos of smiling families and "Welcome to Willow Pines" plaques, a carefully staged facade of unity. Patricia tapped her gavel on the table. "We're here to address a pattern of disruptive behavior originating from the Anders residents." Her gaze locked on me, unblinking. "The board has received multiple complaints about unauthorized activities and threats to community safety." I resisted the urge to scoff, instead glancing at Len, who sat to Patricia's right. His hands gripped his pen tight enough to bend it. He wouldn't meet my eye. Around him, other board members nodded along, some with the wary look of people following orders they'd rather not understand. Patricia continued, voice crisp. "Effective immediately, the Anders property will be fined for each infraction. All communal privileges, pool access, playground use, are suspended pending review. If non-compliance persists, further legal action will be considered." The words landed like blows. I kept my voice level. What exactly am I accused of? Practicing karate in my own backyard? Repainting a treehouse? My words rippled through the lobby. I saw a few heads nod, others shrink into their collars. Patricia didn't flinch. "This isn't about hobbies or home improvements. It's about precedent. If we allow violations to stand, we lose order. If families can disregard community standards, why have them at all?" Someone in the back, Mrs. Connolly maybe, cleared her throat, as if to object, but Patricia shut her down with a look. The board scribbled notes, but the outcome felt preordained. I realized, standing there, that this wasn't just about me or Evan. It was a message to everyone. Step out of line, and you're next. Len shifted in his chair, body language tense, shoulders hunched, eyes flicking to the door, as if he wished he could escape. I caught his gaze just long enough to see the apology buried there, but his silence was as loud as any accusation. The meeting moved fast, fines announced, privileges revoked, the threat of litigation hanging over our heads like a storm. I left the clubhouse with a printed notice in hand, the HOA's logo stamped at the bottom like a warning. As I walked out, I felt eyes follow me, some sympathetic, most afraid. Back at home, our son waited by the window. "Well," he asked, not looking up from his sketchbook. "We're officially on the blacklist," I said, trying for lightness. "No pool, no playground, and a stack of fines. Patricia wants us to fold. She's raising the stakes." He nodded, face hardening. "We're not leaving." I sat beside him, letting the silence speak for both of us. The sun struggled through clouds, lighting the treehouse in a way that made it seem older and stronger at the same time. I looked at Evan, his jaw set, shoulders squared, a fighter born from loss. This was more than just an HOA spat now. Patricia's war had left the shadows and taken center stage. Her message was clear: comply or pay the price. What she didn't realize was that the more she pushed, the less I had to lose. Some people break under pressure, others sharpen. It was time to show her which kind we were. After the emergency board meeting, my house felt different. The kitchen still smelled faintly of coffee and lemon disinfectant, but the walls seemed to listen now. I found myself pausing at the back window, counting the ways Patricia's threats had seeped into our routine. Every shadow in the yard looked like suspicion. Every neighbor's footsteps in the gravel outside sent a fresh spike of anxiety through my chest. The worst part wasn't the fines or the bans. It was the sense of being watched, as if our home had been marked. I needed air, so I headed upstairs to my office, a room lined with monitors, tangled wires, and old military commendations that hadn't left their boxes since my wife's funeral. It was here I felt most myself. The hum of the hard drives, the familiar grid of security camera feeds. They reminded me there were still things I could control. And tonight, I needed control. I scanned through hours of backyard footage, watching the usual parade of raccoons, delivery trucks, and Evan's clumsy martial arts practice. But something new stood out. Motion alerts from the previous evening. I rewound, slowing the video. There. A figure slipping through the alley behind our fence, moving with the calculated confidence of someone who'd done it before. The camera's infrared captured the glint of keys and the swipe of a phone screen against our new motion-activated lights. I toggled to the front yard camera, where another alert popped up. Different angle, same time. Patricia. Her crisp silhouette paused by our mailbox, phone raised, as if searching for something specific. A blue glow spilled from her screen, reflecting on the curb. She lingered, typing, then slipped something into the mailbox before walking away. My jaw clenched. It wasn't just surveillance, it was a pattern, a hunt. I checked the camera logs for unusual pings. The system flagged several IP addresses connecting to our home's Wi-Fi at odd hours. Strange, since we'd locked it down. Someone with admin-level access had attempted to pair a device to our network, using a spoofed MAC address that almost slipped past the filters. Almost. My military background had taught me to build redundancies, trapdoors within trapdoors. I followed the trail, tracing the digital footprints back to a device registered in the HOA's pool office. The implications snapped into focus. Patricia, and maybe the whole board, had overstepped, weaponizing technology not just to watch us, but to infiltrate our home. This wasn't just rule enforcement, it was harassment bordering on criminal intrusion. I sat back, letting the chair creak under my weight, and took a slow breath. In this moment, the fear receded. What replaced it was something colder, clarity. They weren't just crossing boundaries, they were breaking laws. Every camera feed, every digital log was a thread I could pull. Evan knocked softly at the door. He poked his head in, trying to mask his anxiety with a half-hearted joke about needing tech support. I motioned him over, showing him the frozen frames on the screen. Patricia lurking by the mailbox, the strange logins, the pattern of unauthorized access attempts. His eyes widened as the truth settled in. "They're spying on us?" he whispered, voice equal parts fear and awe. "Trying," I said, my tone steady. "But we're not the only ones. I'd bet they're watching the Petersons, the Connollys, anyone who's ever pushed back." Our son shook his head. "How do you fight something like that?" I met his gaze. "With proof. With the truth. We don't need to shout. We just need to show everyone what's really happening." He nodded, understanding growing behind his tired eyes. For the first time since the board meeting, I saw resolve instead of just fear. I spent the rest of the night consolidating evidence, backing up video files, creating timelines, documenting every unauthorized login attempt. I drafted a report, careful to highlight how the HOA's actions violated local privacy ordinances and state law. My office, once a refuge, became a war room. The hum of servers became the soundtrack to a fight I hadn't wanted, but now welcomed. As dawn crept through the blinds, a plan began to take shape. The board thought they were the only ones with leverage, the only ones who understood the system. They were wrong. The difference between a bully and a tactician is that one gets reckless and the other keeps receipts. This was the turning point. No more playing defense. From here on, every step Patricia took would be documented, every violation cataloged. The game had changed, and I was the one writing the new rules. By the time the morning sun slipped past the curtains, the house had settled into a quiet that felt almost fragile. I found Evan sitting at the kitchen table, a mug of cocoa cradled in his hands, staring into the steam as if he could read his own future in it. The scar on his knuckle, a souvenir from fixing the hideaway's roof last summer, caught the light as he fidgeted with the handle. He didn't look up when I entered. I sat across from him, the table between us marked with scratches and dents from a decade of spilled cereal, homework, and late-night talks. This was where we'd planned birthday parties, where we'd mourned his mother, where we'd argued and forgiven and made impossible promises. But now there was a new shadow, stretching from the treehouse to the kitchen, tightening its grip on both of us. "You didn't sleep," I said softly. He shook his head, lips pressed thin. "Every time I close my eyes, I see her. The gun. The laser. It doesn't go away." For a long moment, I just listened. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant chirp of a lawnmower, the low murmur of our neighbor's radio drifting through the open window. It all felt too normal for a house under siege. I reached for Evan's hand, surprised at how cold it felt. "You're safe now," I said, knowing how flimsy the words sounded. He pulled away, eyes wet. "Am I? They can do whatever they want, Dad. They're not afraid of anyone, not even you." I wanted to promise him otherwise, to tell him I could fix this, the way I'd fix scraped knees and broken toys. But this wasn't a problem that could be solved with duct tape or a stern phone call. Patricia's campaign wasn't just about rules or power. It was about breaking us, one sleepless night at a time. He stared at the window, jaw set. "I don't want to go to the treehouse anymore." His words hit harder than any fine, any threat. The hideaway was more than wood and nails. It was a living memory of his mother, a place she'd built with her father, a promise we'd made to each other to hold on, no matter what. Losing it felt like losing her all over again. I looked at my son, his face still young, but his eyes too old, and something hardened inside me. This was the line. The enforcer could levy fines and ban us from the pool, but she would not erase our memories. She would not take from Evan the last piece of his mother he had left. That afternoon, I called in sick and spent hours walking the backyard, checking every sensor and camera, tightening bolts, patching wires. I replayed Patricia's trespass on the screens, her sneer as she snapped photos, the way she moved like she owned the ground under her feet. I cataloged every frame, knowing each was another nail in the case I was building. The next day, the mailbox clattered, another notice from the board, this one warning that our continued disregard for HOA regulations could result in legal escalation. I tore it open, reading the veiled threats between the lines. They were trying to outweight us, to wear us down with paperwork and paranoia. He stayed inside, barely speaking. I caught him once by the window, looking at the treehouse, his shoulders hunched. He didn't ask to go out. He didn't ask about the pool or the playground or his friends. He just turned away, retreating deeper into the silence that our antagonist and her board had created. That evening, after our son went to bed, I stood alone in the kitchen, hands braced on the countertop. My mind spun through every skill I'd learned: military training, surveillance, the logic of systems and networks. For years, I'd used those skills to protect strangers, to build safety out of chaos. Now, I'd use them to defend my own home. I started making lists, neighbors who'd been targeted, patterns in the fines, timestamps from the network intrusion attempts. I mapped it all out on a yellow legal pad, drawing lines between names and dates, violations and board meetings. Each connection made the picture clearer, a campaign, not a coincidence. If they wanted a fight, I'd give them one. But I wouldn't play by their rules. I'd make my own. Because sometimes, the only way to protect what matters most is to become the storm they never saw coming. By the time the house settled into midnight silence, I was ready. No more waiting. No more hoping the enforcer would come to her senses. Tomorrow, I'd start turning the tables. The day after my resolve hardened, I found myself wandering the neighborhood just before sunset, restless energy driving each step. Willow pines looked almost peaceful in the fading light, the last kids racing bikes down the path, parents wrangling toddlers toward home, sprinklers arcing rainbows across manicured lawns. But beneath the calm, I felt the tension. My every glance was mirrored in a neighbor's cautious nod, an unspoken warning lingering in the air. At the park's edge, I spotted Len Brooks sitting alone on a weathered bench, his suit jacket folded neatly beside him, sleeves rolled up. He looked older than I remembered, his shoulders hunched, gaze locked on a row of ducks gliding across the pond. For a moment, I hesitated, unsure if I was intruding or expected. But Len's eyes found me, And he nodded, the invitation silent but unmistakable. I sat, leaving space between us. Neither of us spoke at first. The world seemed to hold its breath, just the quiet lap of water, the distant murmur of families packing up. Len tapped his fingers against the bench, then turned, his jaw working as if searching for words he hadn't said in years. "You ever wish you could take something back?" he asked, voice low. He didn't wait for an answer. "I joined the board to keep the peace. Thought maybe I could fix things from the inside. But the way things are going, I'm not sure I know what peace looks like anymore." He stared at his hands, knuckles white. "Patricia, she's not just following rules. She's making them up as she goes. You're not the first she's tried to break. You just happen to be the one fighting back." He shook his head, shame flickering in his eyes. "I've looked away too long. I can't do it anymore." I watched him carefully, unsure whether to thank him or challenge him. "Why now, Len?" His breath came out ragged. "Because my wife keeps asking me how I can live with myself. Because my daughter left town to get away from all this. Because I saw the look in your son's eyes, and I recognized it." He let that sit for a beat, emotion tightening his features. "I have something you need." He fumbled in his jacket, pulling out a folded slip of paper. His hand shook as he pressed it into mine. "Patricia's been authorizing private security to monitor certain families. Not just you, Peterson's, Connolly's, even Mrs. Connolly's nephew. The board votes aren't recorded properly. They're staged. And the network in the pool house. I checked the access logs like you suggested. Someone's been using HOA credentials to connect to private networks after hours. I read the note, logins, dates, addresses. It was the missing link, the connection between our antagonist's harassment and real actionable violations. Len watched my reaction, the relief almost painful to witness. "You didn't get this from me," he whispered, "but if you need me to, I'll back you up. I can't promise anyone else will. The others, they're scared. Or they like the power." A silence settled between us, thick with years of regret and a flicker of hope. "Thank you, Len," I said quietly, tucking the paper into my pocket. "You don't know what this means." He laughed, a small, bitter sound. "No, I think I do. Just do something good with it. Show them what real accountability looks like." We watched the ducks for a while, letting the gravity of the moment settle. I realized how much this had cost him, risking his standing, maybe even his friendships, for the truth. In a world built on silence, Len's confession was the first honest thing I'd heard in weeks. As the streetlights buzzed to life, I stood and shook his hand. A simple gesture, but one that felt heavier than any official vote. "You did the right thing," I told him, and for the first time, I saw something like relief soften his expression. Walking home, I felt the gears turning. I had what I needed: proof, a witness, and the beginning of a coalition. Her strategy depended on isolation and fear, but that was starting to unravel. Maybe people like Len could tip the balance. Maybe, with the right push, the whole board could be forced to answer for what they had done. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. But now, for the first time, I believed the neighborhood might be ready to see what had been hidden all along. The following morning, I left our son sleeping and stepped into the chilled air before dawn. The quiet streets of Willow Pines held a new weight. The knowledge in my pocket, the names, dates, network logs Len had slipped me, felt both dangerous and electrifying. For the first time, I didn't feel alone in this fight. There were cracks in our antagonist's armor, and now I intended to pry them wide open. I parked outside the only coffee shop in town that opened before sunrise. Inside, the scent of burnt espresso and vanilla hung heavy, the clink of cups behind the counter an oddly comforting soundtrack. In the corner, away from the morning regulars, I found Marissa Lee, a civil attorney I'd worked with back when security consulting was my bread and butter. She greeted me with a quick nod, eyes sharp above her coffee. I slid into the booth, lowering my voice. "I need you to look at something. Off the record." She listened as I laid out the story, the surveillance, the network intrusions, the pattern of harassment. I showed her the access logs, the proof Len provided, her brow furrowed, fingers flying across her tablet as she checked statutes and case law. When I finished, she leaned back, lips pursed. "This isn't just an HOA overreach, Michael. It's a privacy violation and probably criminal harassment. You've got evidence, Timestamps, network data, a witness. Most HOAs get away with intimidation because nobody fights back, but this is different. If you push, you'll be putting them on the defensive. I nodded, feeling the pieces slotting together. How do I make it stick? First, document everything. Videos, emails, logs. Build a timeline. Second, get statements from other targeted families if you can. Third, file a formal complaint with the city and be ready to go public if they try to bury it. People underestimate the power of neighbors speaking out together. As she left, her parting words followed me out the door. Don't wait too long. The more they think they're untouchable, the sloppier they get. I spent the rest of the day quietly reaching out. The Petersons were wary, but agreed to meet. Mrs. Peterson's hands trembled as she recounted late-night warnings left on their door. Mr. Connolly had proof of his own. Security footage of a masked figure, Patricia, unmistakable in her walk, planting a violation notice under his windshield in the middle of the night. Each conversation revealed the same pattern: intimidation, isolation, and the constant threat of escalating punishment. Over lattes and pastries, I laid out my plan. We need to build a case. Together, one voice is easy to silence. 5 voices make it a story. 10, that's a reckoning. It was slow work, and not everyone was ready to go public. Some were afraid of retaliation, others convinced nothing would change. But the more I listened, the more I realized that what she feared most wasn't exposure to the city. It was exposure to the people she claimed to represent. Back home, I turned my office into a war room. Files, video clips, printed emails, and timelines covered every surface. Evan watched from the doorway, curiosity warring with lingering fear. "Are you building a case?" he asked one evening, voice quiet. I nodded. With a little luck, this is the beginning of the end for our antagonist's reign. "Are we safe?" His question hung in the air, heavy as a verdict. "For now," I said honestly, "but we won't be if we stay silent." Night after night, I worked, drafting complaints, cross-referencing logs, prepping backup drives, and quietly coaching neighbors on what to say and how to say it. Marissa reviewed every document, highlighting weak spots, strengthening arguments, reminding me to keep the story focused on what mattered: privacy, safety, and the abuse of power. Occasionally, fear crept in, like when headlights paused outside our house too long, or when Evan flinched at every ring of the doorbell. But the fear no longer paralyzed me. It sharpened my focus. For the first time since our antagonist declared war on our family, I felt the tide turning. Not fast, not flashy, but real. By the end of the week, I had a coalition, small but determined. We were ready for the next step. The enforcer and her board could threaten, fine, and isolate, but the truth had a way of breaking through, especially when it had witnesses, records, and the law on its side. The fight wasn't over. But for the first time, I didn't feel like I was fighting alone. We gathered in Peterson's garage one evening, a half-dozen folding chairs crowded between garden tools and boxes of Christmas lights. The air was thick with anticipation, the smell of sawdust, oil, and a hint of anxiety. For the first time, our voices didn't echo off empty walls. There was a pulse of purpose, neighbors breathing together, united by more than fear. I laid out what I'd assembled: video clips of Patricia's late-night prowls, network logs showing unauthorized access, Len's handwritten list of violations the board had buried. As the old bulb overhead flickered, Mrs. Connolly cleared her throat. "Are we really doing this?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, but her hands, usually restless, were steady. "We have to," I said. "They count on us being isolated. If we let this go, it won't stop with us. It never does." Peterson pulled a battered folder from under the workbench. Inside were his own logs, HOA, emails sent at odd hours, threats to raise fines if he spoke out, and, most damning, a printout of a security company invoice for additional monitoring on specific addresses, his among them. He passed it around, eyes flicking between faces. Len was there too, sitting a little apart, nervous energy vibrating through his knee. "I'm ready to write a statement," he said, voice firmer than before. "I can't speak for the board, but I can say what I've seen. And I'll give you copies of the emails she sent. Off the record, but real." The sense of relief was palpable. Even Mrs. Peterson, usually so cautious, offered her support, promising to speak up if needed. It wasn't a crowd, but it was enough. Each voice was a brick in the wall between us and our antagonist campaign. We discussed logistics. Who would present which evidence? Who would act as point of contact for city officials? How to safeguard files in case the board tried to retaliate. I distributed thumb drives with encrypted backups, explained how to document harassment without escalating it, and outlined our plan for the board meeting, public, recorded, and impossible for the enforcer to brush aside. For a moment, the old doubts crept in. What if the city looked the other way? What if the board doubled down, punishing the families who spoke up? But I pushed the thoughts aside. We had the law, the truth, and now, each other. That was more than I'd started with. Evan wandered in, clutching a tablet. "Got the timeline," he said, handing it over. He'd spent hours that week organizing every event, every threat, into a clear, relentless record. His fingers lingered on the edge of the table, shoulders straightening when Mrs. Connolly thanked him. Pride flared in his eyes, the first spark I'd seen in weeks. "Are we really going to take them down?" he asked, a mixture of fear and hope in his voice. "We're going to make them answer," I replied. "That's what matters." Before we broke for the night, Len pulled me aside, his features tense. "There's something else you should know. Patricia's been talking about pushing for emergency bylaws, something about stripping problem households of voting rights. She hasn't filed anything yet, but she's gathering support." That hit like a gut punch. She wasn't backing down. She was ramping up, determined to hold on to power, whatever it took. But now, I understood her desperation. She knew we had her cornered, and the more she lashed out, the weaker she'd look. As the group dispersed into the cool night, I lingered in the garage, studying the evidence one more time. Every file, every statement, was another step towards something bigger than just our family. We were building a blueprint for resistance, not just for us, but for every neighbor who'd ever been bullied in the name of community standards. At home, Evan collapsed on the couch, exhaustion and relief mingling on his face. "I didn't think we'd get this far," he admitted. I sat beside him, pulling him close. "We're not done yet, but we're not alone." He smiled, tentative but real. The knot in my chest loosened, a flicker of hope threading through the crowd, stubborn and undeniable. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, but tonight we had momentum, and a plan our antagonist couldn't see coming. The morning of the board meeting dawned gray and restless, clouds rolling over Willow Pines like a warning. I left Evan at home. He wanted to come, but this was a battlefield best faced alone. Thumb drives and copies of statements filled my briefcase, evidence packed and double-checked, every file duplicated in the cloud for good measure. My phone buzzed with texts from neighbors, their words short but full of resolve. "We're with you. See you there. Let's finish this." The Civic Center stood on Main Street, a blocky building with aging brick, city flags snapping in the wind. People were already gathering by the entrance when I arrived, neighbors clutching folders, some with faces tight with fear, others with a flicker of hope. Mrs. Peterson offered a determined nod. Peterson and Connolly greeted me in hushed voices. Even Len was there, hands buried deep in his pockets, shoulders squared in a way that spoke of sleepless nights and hard decisions. Inside, the main hall buzzed with a nervous energy, metal chairs lined up with military precision, all eyes on the front where the board presided. At the center of the long table, the association's figurehead sat poised, her suit immaculate, posture rigid, flanked by the city's representative and 2 uniformed officers. Not a hint of warmth crossed her features. When our gazes locked, she lifted her chin ever so slightly, a gesture that blended authority with a flicker of unease. The message was unmistakable. Tonight, control would not be surrendered easily. The air crackled with anticipation as residents found seats, murmurs filling the room. The city liaison called the meeting to order, her voice formal but tinged with curiosity. Patricia wasted no time, launching into her agenda. "This board has a responsibility to maintain order. Recent actions by certain residents have threatened our standards." She paused, eyes on me. "And the safety of this community." I waited for her to finish, then rose when invited to present. I kept my voice steady, letting the truth do the work. "I'm here on behalf of every family who's ever been threatened into silence. What's been happening in Willow Pines isn't enforcement. It's targeted harassment, privacy invasion, and abuse of authority. And I have the proof. I distributed packets, evidence of unauthorized surveillance, access logs from the pool house, emails detailing intimidation campaigns, statements from those who'd been followed or fined for nothing more than speaking out. The city liaison paged through each file, her eyebrows rising as the pattern became clear. One after another, residents rose to share what they had endured. Late night, pounding on doors, anonymous warnings slipped under windshield wipers, footage that was never meant to see the light. The room crackled with confessions, stories of families threatened with silence, voting rights dangled and withdrawn like bait. With every testimony, the careful facade of order and security began to crumble, exposing just how fragile the board's grip on the community had become. And then Len stood. His hands trembled, but his voice was clear. "I'm the HOA treasurer. I've watched these abuses, and I can't stay silent anymore. The board has acted outside its own bylaws, fabricated complaints, and authorized actions that violate state law." He paused, looking directly at our antagonist. "I'm here to say it publicly. This isn't community. This is coercion." For a moment, Patricia looked as if she might explode, her hands balled into fists, lips drawn tight. These are lies, fabrications, resentments from families who refuse to comply. But the crowd didn't buy it. The police officer at her side jotted down notes. The city liaison's pen hovered, waiting for more. I finished with the final blow. Network logs showing the board's attempts to access private Wi-Fi, violation of privacy statutes, and signatures from every affected family asking for an official city investigation. "We're not here for revenge," I said, letting the words settle in the quiet. "We're here for accountability, for our kids, our homes, and the right to live without fear." The meeting erupted into murmurs, some angry, most relieved. The board huddled, whispering in frantic tones. The city liaison stood. "We will review all evidence and notify residents of next steps. Effective immediately, all enforcement actions by this board are suspended, pending investigation." As people filed out, some stopped to thank me, others simply nodded, but their gratitude was plain. Len lingered at the door, shaking my hand, his relief unspoken but unmistakable. She gathered her things, retreating in a swirl of paperwork and brittle pride. I stepped into the sunlight, the sky beginning to clear. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, it felt like Willow Pines might finally belong to its people again. The HOA meeting room hadn't seen a crowd like this in years. Rows of folding chairs filled every inch of the old community center. Neighbors pressed shoulder to shoulder, the air thick with anticipation and nerves. At the front, the board sat in a rigid line, nameplates glinting under fluorescent lights. Patricia's expression was carved from stone, lips pursed, eyes scanning the crowd for allies. Tonight, the masks were off. Camera crews from the local station were setting up in the back, reporters whispering with notepads out, microphones waiting. The city liaison and 2 police officers occupied front row seats, clipboards at the ready. It was more than a meeting. It was a reckoning, and everyone in Willow Pines knew it. I could feel Evan's hand tighten around mine as we made our way to our seats. The room buzzed with hushed voices, bursts of nervous laughter, tension spiraling in the close air. The moment she tapped her gavel, the hum fell to silence. "We're here to address ongoing disruption and disorder," the enforcer began, her voice brittle but loud enough to command attention. "Certain residents have chosen to disregard the standards that keep our community safe." A chorus of murmurs rose, someone near the back muttering, "Safe for who?" Before she could continue, the city liaison stood. "Before any further statements, we'll hear from those who requested the floor." She looked to me, a quiet nod. I rose, every eye on me, the weight of weeks, months, pressing on my shoulders. I glanced at Evan, at the cluster of neighbors behind him, and felt their trust steady me. "I'm not here to pick a fight," I began, voice steady, "but to ask for accountability. For far too long, this board has used power not to protect, but to control. We have proof, surveillance logs, evidence of illegal network access, statements from multiple families. The time for silence is over." A ripple ran through the crowd. I distributed packets to the liaison and police, evidence painstakingly assembled. Len's statement, the access logs, security footage, the pattern of intimidation and surveillance that had haunted us for years. Each document was a nail in the coffin of Patricia's narrative. It was Len's turn next. He stood, shoulders squared, hands trembling only slightly as he spoke. "My name is Leonard Brooks. I've served as treasurer for 6 years. I can't look away anymore. What this board has done isn't just unethical, it's illegal. We've targeted families for personal reasons, doctored meeting minutes, and authorized private security to intimidate dissenters. I have the emails and the logs. I'm here to say I'm done helping you hide it." The board president made a bid to reclaim the room, standing abruptly to dismiss the mounting testimony as little more than bitterness and fabrication. But her words unraveled mid-sentence as yet another voice rose from the crowd, then another, and another. Tales of intimidation and sleepless nights spilled into the open, screens lit up with evidence, time-stamped warnings arriving long after dark, security footage played for all to see. There, in undeniable clarity, was the enforcer herself, caught in the act, slipping violation slips under cover of midnight, thinking no one would ever notice. Every new voice chipped away at her authority. Even the board members looked uneasy, some staring at their laps, others shifting uncomfortably as the room grew louder. The city liaison signaled for quiet. "We've received formal complaints and will be launching an official investigation. Effective immediately, all HOA enforcement will be paused, pending review." A wave of relief swept the room, mingled with angry murmurs and exhausted sighs. People embraced in the aisles, shaking hands, some wiping tears. The room belonged to the people now, not the shadows of fear that once haunted every meeting. Evan squeezed my hand, pride flickering in his smile. Len found me as the crowd began to thin. "Thank you," he said, voice rough. "I never thought we'd get here." I clasped his hand, meeting his eyes. "You did the hard part. You told the truth." She gathered her things in silence, her mask cracked at last. The police took statements, reporters interviewed neighbors, the meeting's echoes drifting out into the night. On the bulletin board near the exit, someone had posted a sign, "No more fear. This is our home." As I stepped outside, the cool air hit me, filling my lungs with something sharp and hopeful. The treehouse in our yard was lit from inside. He had left the lamp burning, a beacon against the dark. If you've ever wanted to stand up to unreasonable rules and see justice done, drop a like and subscribe to follow the rest of this story. Your support means more than you know. Tomorrow would bring its own questions. But tonight, laughter spilled out from the park and drifted across the lawns, carrying a promise that the worst was finally behind us. A week after the board's power was suspended, Willow Pines felt lighter, like the storm that had shadowed our homes had finally broken. The lawns, once empty in the evenings, now overflowed with laughter. On Saturday, neighbors gathered in the park beneath the old pecan tree, folding tables spread with lemonade and homemade pie. The playground a swirl of color and movement. It wasn't an official event, just a spontaneous celebration, a neighborhood letting out a breath it didn't know it was holding. I stood near the treehouse, our son beside me, both of us watching as kids raced up the wooden ladder, their shouts ringing through the dusk. For so long, the treehouse had been a fortress, a symbol of our isolation. Now, it was something different, a gathering place, a monument not to loss, but to what we'd reclaimed. The light inside glowed warm and steady, spilling through the windows as families drifted past, smiling, finally unafraid. Mrs. Peterson waved as she handed out cookies, her husband deep in conversation with Len and Connolly, comparing stories, sharing relief. The board, for the first time, was nowhere to be seen. Patricia's absence echoed, but not as a threat, as a silence in which something better could finally take root. Our son ran a hand along the treehouse railing, his touch lingering over the initials carved into the wood. His mother's, his grandfather's, now his own. He looked up at me, eyes clear. "You think she'd be proud?" he asked quietly. I didn't have to think. I know she would. You didn't give up, even when it felt impossible. The sun dipped behind the houses, painting the sky in its peach and violet. Len approached, a tired smile breaking through the old lines of worry. "Never thought I'd see Willow Pines come together like this," he admitted. "Feels like we're starting over." "You did your part, Len. You helped us get here," I replied. clapping his shoulder. He nodded, eyes bright. Nearby, the city liaison stopped to greet us, promising updates on the investigation. The police had taken statements, launched a review of the board's actions, and made it clear that Willow Pines wouldn't be ruled by fear again. Len and I exchanged a look, relief, gratitude, and the quiet understanding that this victory belonged to more than just one family. As the evening deepened, I found myself circling the treehouse, tracing every memory hidden in its boards. This place, once a reminder of grief, had become the heart of something new. The losses we'd endured hadn't disappeared, but now they were woven into the neighborhood's story, a foundation for hope instead of pain. Kids called him to join a game of tag, their laughter chasing him across the grass. For the first time in months, he ran toward them, not away. Watching him disappear into the crowd, I felt something settle, a weight lifted, a promise kept. Neighbors lingered long after dusk, reluctant to let the night end. Lanterns flickered on porches, conversations ran soft and deep, and the sense of shared victory hung in the warm summer air. Under the treehouse, I looked at the faces around me, no longer strangers divided by fear, but a community drawn together by the will to stand up, to protect, to heal. As the celebration wound down, I gathered my things, waving goodbye to the last of the families. Evan trailed behind, eyes shining with pride and exhaustion. We paused beneath the pecan tree, looking up at the lights in the treehouse one last time. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now and share your story in the comments. Because together, we're stronger than any rulebook, and every voice matters. We walked home side by side, our shadows long on the pavement. The neighborhood felt new, yet familiar, a place remade by courage and by the simple power of neighbors refusing to be afraid. Whatever came next, we knew one thing for certain. This was home, and it always would be.